here in the 50s, and the diversity in Seattle was the Swedes and the Norwegians.
Different whites, basically.
Yeah. Different, yeah, northern whites. and the differences are like one spells their name with an E on the end, and the other has an O on the end. They fight.
Well, that's like, what I was going to say is I think that there's just something in human nature that whatever the greatest difference is, people will exploit and use that to tear each other apart. In the same way that when the Irish came over or when the Italians came over, they were like the exploited minority. And then all of a sudden, you've got people coming in from elsewhere, and it takes a little bit of the heat off of them.
That's such a good point, because it's so relevant to now that we've always seen other people from other countries that way, even when they're the same religion, but especially when they're not, especially like when they've been Catholics or something.
It is a strange thing in human nature. I guess we're just sort of wired to form cliques and clans, it seems like.
Yeah, the Scandinavians, like the Scandinavians, like the Icelanders, they're like lowest on the totem pole in Scandinavia. And then it used to be, and then the Danes are like, we're the best. They're down on the Swedes. There's a movie about that, about Swedish slaves arriving in Denmark. Yeah. Indentured servants, I think.
Which is, again, like one rung above being a slave. Yeah. It's like a slavery that you could hypothetically get out of at some point.
Yeah, right, exactly.
What brought you back to Seattle? Was it family?
Back to Seattle in 1989, my mom died. I inherited the house that I pretty much grew up in, and got back here and started right in on the garden, terraforming the place, trying to throw things out, and not doing a very good job of it.
You inherited a house and just became instantly domestic?
No. Not. I wouldn't say that. I just spent 10 years in Manhattan, and when I was hired by the National Lampoon as an editor, they paid my way to, I had a house in St. Pete, and I was living in Los Angeles. I was living in Silver Lake in Los Angeles. And so I moved from LA back to St. Pete, went to New York, and my apartment was ready for me. And I just moved into it and lived there I had a dog in Manhattan. I lived in the Village on East 11th Street, 50 East 11th Street, which is like right around the corner from Washington Square Park. So, but New York was almost too much for me. I had a lot of fun there, but I've never been to the Statue of Liberty. I've never been to the Empire State Building. I was just sort of holed up in my little apartment usually. And so, I worked for Lampoon there for a while. I don't know, Doug Kenny died, and everything got very depressing in 1981. John Lennon was killed. I was soon in therapy twice a week. It was that I had a stalker and could barely handle it. So I ended up I never felt, like people who live in Manhattan. Do you live in Manhattan?
I live in Queens.
Okay. So people who live in New York and love New York, they love the architecture. They love the things. They love the theater. They love a lot of things that I just don't personally care about, and the whole history of the place. And I just never was that rooted in an area. So I used to wake up sometimes in the middle of the night and just think, oh my God, what if I die here? I don't want to die here.
Why would that be such a terrible fate?
I was like waking up alone in a little apartment and thinking, if I die here, nobody's going to know.
Okay. It's like the Collier Brothers story. I'm sure you're familiar with that.
My Brother's Keeper, the one with all the newspapers?
Yeah. The two brothers who got crushed to death with their newspapers.
Yeah, it is very, very much like that. I mean, my life is very much like that. I have a lot of stuff. I mean, you can look at my stuff here, and I collect a lot of stuff, and I consider that a good thing.
I've been here for about 15 years at this point, and I have also never been up in the Empire State Building, and I've never been inside the Statue of Liberty. And I think that might just be part of, once you live in a place, you don't necessarily want to visit all the sites. Like I'm sure you don't spend a lot of time, in the Space Needle, for instance.
Well, not lately, but if you come to visit me, I will take you on the what my girlfriend used to call the Nazi tour. I'm the Nazi tour guide because I make you look at everything that I think is cool here. I do really like this area now. I appreciate it now, where I didn't before. I mean, I learned that if you move to Florida, it's so hot in the summertime that unless you live on the beach, you can't go outside. It's uncomfortable. You can barely breathe. You have to be in the air conditioning. And so that's as bad as having a winter.
Do you feel that the idea that you wanted to escape to the big city was overstated?
Originally I escaped to the Bay Area, to San Francisco in 1971. I turned 21 and got in a car with a bunch of other people and went down to Berkeley, soon joined up with the Air Pirates group. And that was, I'd already been doing some comics and artwork for, I was trying to think of a better name than underground paper, but it was
we call them alternative weeklies now.
Yeah, and it's so different from an alternative weekly because it's so much more angry and political and different. And it was alternative news. It was news that we weren't getting anywhere else. Homegrown news. I just thought being around sunshine would be better. And when you're younger, you just do that. You travel around looking for a life, I think.
I'm from the Bay Area originally. I'm from the East Bay. And I get the sense, not so much with Berkeley, but certainly with San Francisco, that San Francisco is not nearly as sunny as people probably think it is.
Yes. So Oakland is 10 degrees warmer than San Francisco, and San Jose is 10 degrees warmer. So
I'm from Fremont, which is right.
Oh yeah, Fremont.
In Oakland and San Jose, basically.
Yeah, you just get right on the BART train and you've got all the amenities.
You were already a cartoonist to some degree by the time you moved out to San Francisco. You were drawing at that point.
Yeah, because I had been working on the underground paper, and we went down as missionaries to the Sky River Rock Festival, to political missionaries, not really missionaries.
In the sense that you were spreading the good word.
Well, yeah, because we had this Gestetner machine that we would, this mimeograph machine in the back of a truck, and we were turning out our own version of the newspaper. Because that was like what we did. I love publishing, and we were publishing. And I was fresh out of art school, and I met Dan O'Neill, who was working for the San Francisco Chronicle. Ted Richards and Bobby London had been working for the Berkeley Tribe. And Gary Halgren, they had come up from California, and Gary Halgren, who had created Splendid Sign with another really great artist here. He was trying to get into comics. I think that was why he was there. Anyway, he was there too.
They were making signs, like signage, hand painted. No.
In Seattle, he made signs, but not that I know of at Sky River.
No, but when you say Splendid Sign, like that was what he was doing for a living, was actually painting signs.
They revolutionized the whole world of signs by bringing back the original, like the turn of the century lettering styles and everything.
It's just a weird aside, but I was reading the interview you did with a comics journal a number of years ago, and the other guy that you mentioned who worked with Gary went on to do the Starbucks logo. So he had a pretty good career. Wild, because it's just information that isn't out there for some reason.
This is the thing about Seattle, is there are a bunch of people who are like wildly talented, and they stay here, and everybody here knows them. Not so much now, maybe, but they did. You could become famous in Seattle, but it would not be national, because the national media, the people in New York thought we still had dirt streets and rode horses when I went there in the 70s. And it was nice because you could say, well, I'm from Seattle, and they had no reference. They couldn't put you in any kind of category, with a religion or social category. It was just sort of a blank slate to be from it. So it was nice.
So you moved back in 89, and obviously you're right on the cusp of Seattle. That's really right at the point where Seattle kind of becomes the the cultural epicenter of the world.
Microsoft,
But also Nirvana, and grunge and all this stuff that was happening in Seattle in the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, and I was married to a musician at the time. And so he didn't think he wanted to stay here. And then he was like, this is great. So he loved it. So that was one reason. We thought maybe we would just stay for a year or so and then rent the house out to somebody else and go back to New York. But we decided not to do that because we were having fun here.
After you're going through this difficult time, and it sounds like it was both internal and external struggles when it came to Lampoon, how much of an impact did that have on your work as a cartoonist? Did it make it difficult for you to keep working on the strip?
Well, I think there was a period of time when I might have stopped because it started out being a monthly deadline. And then I broke up with my first husband, who was a cartoonist, Bobby London. And I didn't think I could do my comic strip anymore. I went through a period of like total, okay, that's over. What next? And I think I probably ended up going back to New York or something. I forget exactly. I produced a couple of books on my own. And I just started working again, and the Lampoon kind of had me back, and I would just continue to do this thing, which is every month you do a page and send it in, and then they would ask me to do like 3 or 4 pages of color. So I was doing that too. It was great. I was in San Jose then after that, and there was a swimming pool in the backyard, and I'd lay out in the sun all day and write my strips and then go in and draw them all night. So I think probably there was a period of time like that. When I left Lampoon, I traveled a lot. I came back out to California and hung out with my friends, and I just like took a vacation, and then ended up back doing the same work and doing other things. I don't just do cartoons. I did animatics for J. Walter Thompson. I did kind of a lot of illustration work, just whatever comes in the door. I'm pretty lazy as an artist. I wait for a phone call or somebody to ask me to do something.
The strip must have been nice though, because I suspect you at least had some specific deadlines and you knew what you were working on for an extended period.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to explain that to you. My career is not. I don't think my career is like most people's career. I have never ever pushed it. I've never like really sought out things. I do what people ask me to do. The Lampoon was a really rich source of work for me for a long time. King Features, there were books that I illustrated for King Features. I illustrated Bruce Fierstein's Nice Guys Sleep Alone, which came after his big hit book and wasn't as big a hit, but that took me forever. I went out to California and consulted on what all that meant, Nice Guys Sleep Alone, and then wrote a bunch of cartoons and drew them. And that was a typical project. You do 90 cartoons and there's like 15 of them in the book. That's how the work comes out. My work I'm really big on, I teach some, and I'm really big on, garbage in, garbage out. And my feeling is that you want to consume a lot of an eclectic kind of information. Mm. So you're not just looking at your own work. You're not just looking at other people's work that's like yours. You do a lot of reading, you experience a lot of things, travel. So, and then I was very busy looking for a cool husband at the time I left Lampoon. And that's a lot of work.
Did you say you were very busy looking for a husband?
Yes, I did.
I know, I guess abstractly what that means, but pragmatically, what does that mean?
This is the thing, is that I think I feel a little embarrassed about how important it has been for me to have a cool husband, but it was instilled in me by my parents, who thought that I should find a nice midshipman, because my father was a career naval officer and my mother had done that. She found a nice midshipman, who was, she knew him before that, but she married him for security. And they thought that since they felt that I was probably useless as a human being and that I should just find someone to marry. And then I would be able to survive life. No talk of college, no talk of career, nothing, not groomed to have a career. There was only if you had a career, it was a fallback. It was something you fell back on if your marriage didn't work out. But when I did start to have a career, so my first husband was a cartoonist, and I talked him into marrying me. My father was dying of cancer, and I was torn between these two men, my dying father and my boyfriend, who I knew that if I left him alone, he would drift off. And he was really cool. Bobby London was amazing guy. He'd been corresponding with Stan Laurel for years, and he knew everything there was about that era of comedy, like the great directors and about like how they projected funniness, things like that. He was a real scholar, and it was a blast talking to him. It was a blast working with him. And we were, I was 21 when I got married. And he used to say, people would go like, "Are you happy you got married?" And he'd go like, "No, that's not a good basis for a relationship." So that didn't work out. And then I was single again for another over 10 years. So it wasn't like I just raced from, one cool husband to another, but my next husband was electric folk musician coming from the New York punk scene, like New York punk musicians who decided that they were going to do folk. And they were a blast. And it was very fun being married to him. And he died after we moved back here. But we had a great time. I had the Kingston Trio in my living room. So like that was like a pinnacle for me. So that was a good marriage. And but I guess my point is, and I finally married a Boeing engineer out here.
Not quite Navy, but it's sort of in the proximity, right?
Really, much more because he came from the Navy family. But the thing is that this is what I've learned. And that is, I think this works for men too. But you have a career and you think that if you are going to be this cool person with this cool career, which I thought I was pretty cool when I was working for Lampoon. And I thought that men would be tripping over themselves to marry me because I was just so darn cool. They don't care. That's not what they're looking for.
That dynamic doesn't go in both directions. And I think, especially when it comes to career stuff and coolness, that men are incredibly competitive in a way that isn't necessarily constructive to having a relationship with somebody who potentially has a cooler job than they do.
Totally true. Yes. And also I think men expect a lot from having their careers too, that they expect that if they're going to have a cool career, that things are going to fall into place for them. So I think it's not necessarily just a female looking for a husband thing. I think these things that we think we will get if we're successful.
I think the dynamic has shifted a little bit, but this has always been the case of, and particularly for women, of which one of these things do I want to prioritize, potentially to the detriment of the other, a relationship and marriage or a career. It's difficult for a lot of people to have both.
Yeah. Although some people do it really well. I don't know how the magic happens. So, I mean, I'm not down on marriage, although I'm now officially a Black widow. I mean, which is, I don't kill them, but they die. My second husband died, my third husband died. And anyone now who takes a chance on me is really going to be brave.
It's good that you have a sense of humor about it, because I can't even imagine that happening once, let alone multiple times. I mean, that must just be completely just devastating to every part of your life.
It's just weird. It's strange, but you just, it's like everything else. I mean, what are you going to do? You just move on. And so doing this book, my husband died around Christmas 2018. And then for a year, I I was doing a lot of stuff. I was playing a lot of music with my friends, and writing. I was doing like a ton of like little personal writing and writing poems. And because poems are wonderful because there's no commercial potential at all. Like, you're making art if you're writing a poem. So that was really fun. I mean, and I rebuilt one of my computers, I like upgraded my computer, and I'm like in there, looking at a YouTube video trying to make the parts work. That was really fun. And then Norman Hathaway came to me and said, hey, I want you to do this book, basically. Like I was saying, things just come in the door to me and then I follow through. And that's what I did. I mean, he said, let's do the book. I pulled out all this artwork. He hired a photographer to come and literally take pictures with a Nikon camera of the artwork, which is very large. And then he laid out the book. We kind of chose the pages that are in it. We chose the strips that are in it, but we agreed on almost everything. That was fairly easy. And here we go.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I got the sense that you had wanted to do a collection for a long time, but it just hadn't ever come together.
People had asked me to do it, but they either had some sort of odd contingency, like maybe you can do some new stuff to put in it, or we want to do it as a comic book. A couple of people wanted to do it as a comic book, and that didn't interest me in the least, because I had already moved out of the staple binding. The staple binding is like, to me at that time, it's the kiss of death, because you can't put it on a bookstore shelf and read the title of the book on the spine. And back when I was thinking about doing that, bookstores didn't want your comics, so I would have wanted something in the bookstore. I was looking at something really kind of small like this, with one panel on every page, so it would be a very thick book. And then maybe a book like my favorite H.T. Webster books about poker and things like that, where there's a art on one side and then some prose on the other side. So I thought that would be a nice thing to do. And just it just never, and those are the things that I really wanted to do. And I had the two books that came out in France. Comics USA put together a Trots and Bonnie book and a book of the other sex and amour stories. Beautiful hardcover books. So, and I think I had the plates for those back when that would have meant something. I was doing other stuff. I don't know if you want to know these really mundane things about me. I worked in a hardware store for 7 years and I loved it. I was in the shipping department and I could lift 100 pounds. I got really strong. I was handling all kind of like the saws and the things that you wrap pallets with. And it was this incredibly diverse environment, because it was a contract hardware store. So they sold everything from hollow metal doors to fancy, the kind of doorknobs that you would have to special order, Baldwin and things like that. And so everyone that started there came through the shipping department. And it's the thing that I loved about it was nobody knew who I was. What my relationships there were based on the fact that they could trust me to be there and do my job. It was a just show up job. And it wasn't a sit down job for a long time. And all I could think of was Somerset Maugham's The Razor's Edge, of how, are you familiar with that?
Very peripherally.
It's the privileged children of the 20s, the wealthy children of the 20s, and they end up going to Paris. And meanwhile, one of them goes to India and has a mysterious stay in India where they made a movie out of it that's kind of halfway good, but not really capturing it, with Bill Murray. But he comes back and he can cure your headache because he's learned these subtle things, and this
Eastern mysticism,
the whole Eastern thing. And I mean, when it was written, I think it really was a mystery. Now we kind of know about Maharishi kind of things. That's the way I felt about working in the hardware store, was that I was in India. pulling bodies out of the Ganges or something. Yeah. And then when you get laid off from a job like that, because that was one of our depressions, then you're on unemployment, and unemployment is God's gift to artists. So everything that you want to do, you now have the time to do it, and you don't have to worry so much about an income coming in. So that's nice for a while. But they make you apply to other jobs, and I applied at a place called Compassion in Dying here, which is a it was connected with Hemlock. And there were people who broke off from Hemlock because when they were dealing with people who were dying, terminally ill and dying, they didn't want to just hand them a book. They wanted to actually not assist them, because that's not legal, but they wanted to show them how they could kill themselves.
It was hospice care?
It's not hospice. They work with hospice. They're entirely legitimate. I mean, they're in New York. They've changed their name though.
Hemlock that's a loaded term in that context.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. I know a lot about helping people commit suicide, although, it's a political thing. I mean, people have the right to do that. I know more than call me if you need me.
God willing. How does one end up in that world?
Well, so how did we end up in that world? Well, okay, so there I am. I have to apply for jobs. I see this ad. And I think, well, that's weird. And I'm weird. So I'm going to apply for this job. And I went and I talked to the director, and it was like a 2-person office. It was delightful. And he was a wonderful, amazing, smart, incredible guy who'd been through a lot with having a partner died. Everybody involved in that organization has a lot of backstory, and a tragic backstory.
And so do you.
Yes, we had that in common. So I did everything from, and it was a sit down job as opposed to the standing up in the hardware store getting strong. So I was the what do you call them? The Girl Friday, I think is what they used to call it.
Utility player.
Yeah, but first contact for people who called up, and they'd go like, I'm with my father in the hospital and he's screaming that he wants to die. Can you help us?
The classified ad that you respond to, it says we assist people in suicide.
Oh no, it was just admin needed. Admin needed Compassion in Dying. I mean, a name like Compassion in Dying is just struck a chord with me.
I'm sure it jumped out at a lot of people, but it probably jumped out at a lot of people in the negative. Not everybody is built to do that kind of work.
Well, that's true, although it's helping people.
It is, but people, just generally, and when it comes to things like hospice, people just, and I think understandably, like, are made very uncomfortable by being around dying people.
Yeah, that's true. And we had caseworkers who actually would visit with people in their homes. And the main thing that anyone would need to know about it is that once you have the ability, once you can control your own end of life circumstances, you're not very likely to want to go out that way. I mean, it takes a lot and it takes a certain kind of person to want to control their death. But most people just feel better knowing that they can if they need to. I mean, it's like anybody would want that, to know that they would have that, because there are terrible stories about the medical profession and what they will do with somebody who's 90 years old and they want to give them a colonoscopy or something, and people have really terrible things that happen to them. So you're saving them from this really awful thing that happens at the end of their life. So I don't know, you have to be brave, I think. And I feel like that there's a lot of things I'm not, but in that sense, I'm brave. I walk through a lot of doors that other people might not want to walk through.
Yeah.
And you just do it.
You feel like the knowledge that they can do it dissuades them from actually doing it?
Well, the hope is that it will dissuade them from blowing their heads off with a shotgun or something, or hanging themselves, and then the people they love are left to find them. That's one thing that is they really want to eliminate, is something, to be able to die peacefully is a real, gift.
You don't want it to be more traumatic for the people in your life than it has to be.
This is the thing. I mean, it's and now, I mean, one of the main things that I would say we, but I'm not working there anymore, stress is the end of life paperwork, to have your, durable power of attorney and all that kind of stuff together. And it makes you have to state your choices, because if you don't have that, then chances are someone you love is going to have to make those choices. And I went through that with my mother's death. I kept my mother alive when she didn't want to be alive. I'm like, yeah, you do everything you can. And they're like, why? And I said, well, because we want to be there with her or something. I didn't want to lose my mother. And so I really know that side of it, the side that doesn't want to let people go. And it's really hard. And if you're the person who's dying, you can that's a gift that you give to other people, to not make them have to make that choice.
Do you regret having done that with your mother?
Well, I've done a lot of stuff that, I can just attribute to just being naive.
But you feel like if you had the knowledge that you have now, that it might have played out differently.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
We were talking earlier about the desire to be cool and to be around cool people, and I totally get that. And I'm wondering how much of the appeal of a job at a hardware store is that you just don't have to be cool.
It's yes. When I was an editor at Lampoon, I was just a regular editor who was sent out to, bring material into the magazine, comics, but also prose stuff, which was really difficult because they get so much drecky writing, really bad.
Sure.
I'm like, is this bad, or do I just not get it?
It's just over your head. It's so good. It's so smart.
Yeah, but you're getting phone calls all the time from people. I mean, it's just I remember when I had stopped working there and the phone wasn't ringing anymore. It was just like so peaceful. And I loved hanging out with people. I loved being able to take them to lunch. There was always that sort of unequalness of I was the one who could give them work. And I'm not comfortable with, I certainly was not comfortable with that then. I mean, I was like all about not exploiting people.
But the power dynamic was uneven.
It was really uncomfortable. And more so with some people than others. With like, if you're hanging out with Sam Gross, it's pure fun. There's no power dynamic, but people, especially people who were just starting out and all, and I don't know, it was just, and there weren't any incidents, there weren't anything, it was not anything I could point to. It was just compared to being in a place where literally nobody knows that you're even a cartoonist. You're just like this person. It was just so refreshing.
I've worked plenty of retail jobs in my day. And I guess part of the appeal maybe is that in terms of your job requirement and your day-to-day, things are pretty black and white, right? In terms of what people need. If people need a specific hardware part or a tool, like, exactly what that is. And you don't have to be necessarily super creative about it. And there's a lot of pressure when it's not entirely clear what you have to do day to day.
Well, I was not in sales, but I trained people. So I was really good at training people. And I did like a customer service. Like I used to they've lost the entire lock sets for Bill Gates' mansion. How did they disappear? Now we've got to find them. And so,
is that a real example?
Something like that. Yeah. They would just, I guess somebody was stealing them, but it was really, I mean, the process is, an order comes in, you go pick them off the shelves, you bring them back, somebody packs them up, they run them through the UPS machine or put them in the truck room. See, if they put them in the truck room to go somewhere, that was where somebody could walk off with them.
It's fulfillment.
Yes, fulfillment. And and it was great because I had my ego did not exist in that place. And people would go like, how can you stand the salesman talking to you like that? And I'm like, I don't care. It's sort of like the way Melania Trump deals with Trump. If you read the book written by her best friend, and she's talking about Melania, and Melania is just like, I don't care. I don't care about it.
She knows he's an idiot and it doesn't matter.
The thing that was written on the back of her jacket when she went down to the border, that was her. She's just going
I don't really care, do you?
I don't really care. She doesn't really kind of a peaceful, safe place to live in your head.
Sure. I mean, again, context is important in that one, right? I mean, it's, and understandably, some people were put off by that given the things that were happening in the national conversation. But you're right. I mean, it's, in a roundabout way, it's kind of a Zen approach to things.
Oh yeah, I mean, it doesn't make us love Melania, but it does. Yeah. It is. I think it's a way maybe more people live than we would like to think.
And you were happy living like that for a while.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. There's plenty of. I wrote a parody of "Don't Cry for Me, Argentina."
From Evita.
Yes, Evita, the song from it. And I would sing that in the shipping room. It's "Don't cry for me, builder's hardware. I'm afraid we've lost your heart, your door locks or something." And they're like, "Oh yeah, she's weird."
You had said before that part of the reason why your parents were, I guess, in a sense, trying to marry you off is that they felt you were, use the word useless. And I mean, that's a hard thing not to internalize, right? I mean, if the people you're closest to in your life are essentially telling you that, do you start to feel useless?
Totally. Yeah. I don't know. I was a late baby. My mom was like, I think near 40 when I was born. And my father, my family had been at Pearl Harbor when it was bombed. My 11-year-old sister, my sister who's living now, was a month old when that happened, and my other sister died right at the end of the war when she was 11, and so that was 1945. And then came so I was born in 1950 and the Korean War started. So then my dad went off to Korea to fight. So all my mom wanted was to have my dad back and go to the officers club and have cocktails with her friends and live that sort of Mad Men 50s life that was the goal that people had then. And I had total freedom. The kids in my neighborhood just ran wild, and it was, you just lived your life. And I had a credit card when I was, I think, 10 years old. I could go buy stuff. But there was everybody else took the SATs. I never even knew that was happening.
You were on bases the whole time?
No, most of my life, I was in Magnolia. I was born in Virginia. We went to California. We went to Alaska and lived in Kodiak, Alaska, and then came down here. And my father was in military intelligence in Alaska and came down here. I think he was doing the same thing here in Seattle. And then we went to Panama, and he had a quote civilian job, port captain of the Panama Canal, the Balboa side. So it was like a pretty high. There was the governor, the lieutenant governor, and then my dad. And that was heaven. Panama Canal Zone. We had maids, we had gardeners, I had chickens, I had a horse. It was, and then I had to come back. And then my father, they retired a bunch of naval officers at the time, and he could retire as admiral if he retired in 1959, 60. So he did that, and we came back to Seattle, and it was just misery from then on. Seattle was cold and rainy, and the kids were snotty, and it's all the things that are in my comic strip happened.
I mean, I know you stayed put for a while there in Seattle, but when you're trying to figure out who you are and trying to make friends, it has to be incredibly difficult to be moving from place to place like that.
You went through that? Yeah. I mean, kids are not, Navy kids are friendly. It's really easy to make friends in a place like the way it was in the Canal Zone, where everybody's military. Everybody works for the government, or did at that time. So all the kids were kind of in the same situation. They'd all been from somewhere else, and you just made friends. And it's one of the good things about coming from the military, is that you learn how to make friends. You know, I'm super comfortable. I can move to another city now and make friends. Just it's inherent. It's built in. And so, but the other kids are very, you know, they don't like anything strange.
Yeah.
And I have always been different. So from the get-go. And I think, you know, I'm not super smart. I have a lot of sympathy for very intelligent people, because I think their lives are more lonely than they even realize. And it's because they're smart, and they're seeing more, they're absorbing more, they're thinking more about things, analyzing them and stuff. And other people aren't doing that. Other people are just kind of following their path, whatever their path is. And so, and I see that. I see a lot of really, really, really smart, troubled drug addicts, alcoholics, people who are self-medicating this loneliness that you have of not being understood.
Do you feel like that was an issue for you too, that you just couldn't find the right group of people for a while who understood you?
Until I met the cartoonists. Yes, I was thinking about that, because I was thinking when we got together in San Francisco, it was like we were all refugees. And Dan had been fired 3 times from the San Francisco Chronicle.
Got to be a record.
Yeah, well, you know, they would fire him because he dropped acid and then took his characters to Magic Cookie Land. And then, you know, there was a time when I think he wiped a booger off his nose and then shook Ronald Reagan's hand or something. So he was into it. I mean, he's a great character. So, but people loved him and his strip Odd Bodkins, and so they forced the paper to take him back. But finally, the 3rd time was the charm, I guess. So he was in that condition. And then Bobby and Ted, Bobby did this great strip about why Bobby Seale is not Black, because working for an underground paper, you know, it was like it was too cartoony, you know. And so by the time the group of editors at the underground paper that he was working for got done with him, it's like Bobby Seale looked like an Aryan hero with blonde crew cut. And there was that you know, it's uncomfortable, and it's the people that should appreciate you, the left. And I had gone through that. My paper was taken over by Weathermen. And one of the Weathermen, I worked really hard to set up this Christmas tree one year, and they told me it was a bourgeois holiday, and really read the Riot Act to tell me what a terrible person I was for having a Christmas tree in our commune. And I ended up chopping it up and burning it. And so, you know, I was sort of a refugee from that mentality. But the cartoonists, everybody was a little bit pissed off.
You find this underground paper, and you find this group of of like leftists who you think, at least to some degree, are like-minded, but you didn't quite get there, right? You hadn't quite found your group of people who understood you until you took that next step.
Yeah, the people initially at the newspaper were my friends, and we were fine until these other Weathermen people came in with their dogma.
The Weathermen, did a hostile takeover of the underground newspaper?
Pretty much, that's what it felt like. You know,
a wild time, man.
Well, I wasn't running it, because a lot of times they would say that the real editor of the newspaper is the guy that drives it to the printer, because he's got his hands on it the last time. So there's a certain amount of that that it's just brute force. But these people, but they had their ideology, see, and I had been working with anarchists who were real anarchists, not like the Portland anarchists now, which I'm not sure where they're at, but these were anarchists that believed in cooperative societies. That was their main belief. And that's what the Soviet Union had right after the revolution that got destroyed.
It's anarcho-syndicalism.
Yeah. So people that came in and that were, I mean, one of them was a Maoist, the Maoists were just horrible and scary.
This is like a Tom Wolfe book.
Yeah, it is sort of Mao-Mowing the flag catchers. Yeah. We got Mao-Mowed.
Yeah. Again, you're growing up with these parents who are basically effectively telling you that you're useless unless, other than getting married. You go off to art school and then you meet this group and you do find your calling. At what point did you realize that you were in fact not useless?
In therapy after I left Lampoon. Well, yeah, but I've heard Emily Flake say that she has imposter syndrome, and now it has a name, imposter syndrome. But yeah, fake it till you make it is, but those are just practical. Those are just practical things. That's everybody now. We now recognize that everybody feels inadequate at some level, and never having gone to college really made me feel inadequate.
I guess I'm trying to sort of parse the difference between inadequacies, but also, you did have ambition and you did know what you wanted to do and you were able to find success in it. And you didn't go down the road that your parents wanted you to go down. What happened that really took you down this road? I don't know if you think so, but you are in fact cool. You did become a cool person.
Thank you. Where's my husband?
I'll record it and you can show that to people. But
Right.
you are in fact a very cool person, and I want you to know that, in case people don't tell you that enough.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it was the times. It was society. It was that society changed, and it was all the stuff that happened with hippies becoming accepted and all the changes to the thing that ended the war. It was us and them, and it's very similar to the way it is now, because there's a definite them out there. There's a really dumb them, and back then it was hard. We call it the hard hats, the hard hats, and my dad was one of them. He said you better watch out, my friends have guns and they're waiting for you. That's what my father told me. But and he was serious, because they were scared of us. They were scared of the boomer youth. And we really did change things. And it was really nice until, I think, you can speculate a lot about how much, like, the CIA or FBI or J. Edgar Hoover or whatever threw a wrench into that culture and made and threw drugs into the culture.
MK Ultra.
Yeah. And so I'm not sure how much of that there actually was, but or maybe it just disintegrated on its own. But it became the 80s, and Jerry Rubin became a stockbroker. And
that was the moment when you needed to get out of New York and you needed to leave Lampoon, was when kind of Reaganomics was really starting to kick in.
I stayed in New York for another 10 years, almost 10 years after that, with the help of my shrink.
Okay, but that's when you left Lampoon, was that changeover from the 70s to the 80s.
Yeah, it was cosmic. There were a lot of things that were coming together that were like, remember when, or you probably are too young to remember, but when you could play the Beatles record backwards. Yeah.
Paul is Dead.
Yeah, that was the same kind of moment. It was a sort of a cosmic moment of, the Manson killings.
That late 60s, early 70s parallels the 70s into the 80s.
For me, it did. Yes.
That's interesting.
Very much. Yeah.
I've heard that said a lot about the 60s and the 70s, and obviously the Manson murders are very much that moment for a lot of people. hippies turned into something darker. And it makes sense because obviously, now when you think of the 80s, you think of Gordon Gekko and, cocaine and all that stuff. But I've never really heard somebody describe that transition in that way, but it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, a lot of things happened, and a lot of like weird coincidences. Like, just Queen Anne Hill is a place here. It's the neighboring hill next to where I live. I was at the Democratic convention, and I ran into Love Israel, who had a house, had a huge commune thing going on Queen Anne Hill. And then there was a murderer in Thailand. I think they're making another film about him. He's a really interesting guy. He was in Vietnam, Thailand, India, and he specialized in taking tourists, drugging tourists, keeping them alive, but like just to collect their money. He would like collect any money that was coming into them, and he'd use their ID and stuff. And he was working with this other woman and all this stuff. And one of the people he murdered was from Queen Anne Hill. It's just, I'm reading this book and it's like, why is everybody from Queen Anne? It's just it's coincidence, but it was spooky at the time. And there were more things that happened like that.
Spooky to a point that you decided you needed a big change in your life?
No, there was just going on. I mean, the change was happening. The change, this is so odd because I'm just thinking, like, how many people actually change their lives? I mean, do they not just get changed? Nothing happened.
There are people who like decide they're going to change their lives, that they need a change and make dramatic decisions. But I think more often than not, changes happen to people.
Yeah. It all comes together. I'm sorry. I wish I had more time to talk to you where I could just tell you stories. And
you mentioned when people were approaching you with the idea of doing a collection of Trots and Bonnie, that at least one person suggested the idea of doing new material, and that was what put you off to it. There was never any interest in revisiting it? Or now that you've like spent some time with this collection and gone through and looked at all the old stuff and you have this beautiful volume, is it something that you would want to revisit at some point?
Well, I could. If somebody asked me to, I probably would, because I mean, it was a thing that I did in a certain time. I do other stuff now.
Sure.
I'm doing other comics that are more, and also the things that I did are commonplace now. I mean, I did a strip about Bonnie gets her period, and there's a panel with her legs spread with the blood in her crotch, and it's like that was done in the Sacha Baron Cohen's latest movie, and it's hilarious, but it's no longer a point. No, that point does not need to be made, and so there are other things that need to be talked about, and if I had a venue, but I really believe that people are doing one-off comic strips all the time. I was listening to Emily Flake talk about her career and how she pitches things and stuff like that. Well, Emily, if somebody could pay her enough to just give her a space that she could just fill, that's a different mindset. That's a good place for people to be. And I've been trying to get people to do pot comics now and sell them in the shops in the marijuana shops,
the dispensaries.
Well, not dispensaries, because we don't have medical. We have
just have medical, not okay.
We just have commercial pot shops.
So the head shops. Yeah.
And bring back head shops, or people go in and they buy they spend a bunch of money on their drug, and then they see a comic book that costs, $3 or $5 or whatever, and it's got comics in it, and do it every, have it come out every month at least, with some regular artists who have a regular shot, and so you give people a venue, because that's the way comics work, is you know, like the Sunday comics, like the newspaper comics have worked that way for so long. And people who are working on Instagram, like Leanna Fink, has really caught that, because Instagram is the closest you can have to that regular slot. Because cartoonists, they'll have up and downs, you know, one will be good, one will be not so good, but you follow them all the time, follow everything they do. And then some people like this one and don't like that one, you know, so having a nice mix is something else you want. We just don't really have that today. I mean, we sort of have that with Instagram because people are building it. And maybe there are other things that I don't really know about, that where people are doing things, but then they don't pay either. You got to pay them.
Yeah, that's the rub with all of this stuff. Comics wise, what are you up to these days?
Besides working with Nick, the publicist, on selling this book, my theory is that if enough people buy this book, I'll be able to do another one.
Okay.
So there's that. And I'm doing a hell of a lot of writing. I've got more projects. You know, as much unfinished business I have in my house, I have a lot of projects that need to be done. And I'm still working for Joyce Farmer, doing 5 pages on global warming for Joyce Farmer's book. I took a little vacation from working on it, so I hope she's still waiting for it.
She may or may not know that you're still working for her.
Yeah.